So tonight I'm going to tell you 4 stories. The first story is about a fat, yellow, happy little mouse that had brown little babies. The second story is about Wolverine, because he's fucking awesome. The third story is about a mayfly that was hatched from a smooth egg, laying eggs that were spiky. And the fourth story is about how we're so fucking fat. So, everybody knows about DNA. You know that you're built from DNA, that DNA is in every cell of your body, and that this is the blueprint for how we are created. It's the master plan, and that you know that if your dad had black hair and your mom had black hair, the chances of you having blonde hair, while not non-existent, are not great. You understand the whole heredity thing. Let's go back to those 4 stories. I'm going to tell you a story about a fat, happy, yellowy, orangey mouse that had brown children. With the idea of genetics in mind, you could say, well, that's obvious. You know, maybe the brown gene, the gene for brown hair, is dominant, and your little agouti mouse was bred with a mouse that had different fur. But no, this was actually 2 agouti mouse that were bred together. The difference is not genetics. It's not dominant or recessive traits. The difference is the mother mouse was fed a diet that was almost entirely absent of sugars and fats. Just by changing her diet, you changed the genetic expression, not only of her children, but her grandchildren and her children's children's children. Wolverine is story number 2, and he's awesome, and he has mutant powers. Genetics again. Story number 3 is a story about a mayfly that was born from a smooth egg, and yet whose children would be born out of eggs that were spiky. Again, you could try to blame this on genetic differences. Maybe this mayfly bred with another mayfly, and spikes are a dominant trait. But that's not actually the case. Once again, it was something that was not directly genetic. Instead, the only difference between this mayfly and all of the mayflies that came before it was this mayfly, while it was flying around living its life, saw a predator. That's it. It thought of the possibility of violence against itself, and as a result, its genetic expression was changed. Its children were born from eggs with spikes. Its children's children were born with eggs with spikes, so on and so forth, down 8 generations. And the only thing that changed was seeing that predator just that once. The 4th story is, Jesus Christ, we're fat and lazy. And there's reasons for it, but we're not going to get into it because we eat too much sugar. We eat too much high fats. By the way, I have some awesome cookies here if anybody wants them, just saying. So I'm going to tell you tonight how you are going to get your superpowers. It's not genetics. It's not just Wolverine with the claws that come out. How the hell he got those from mutation? Only in comic book land would that ever happen. In real life, genetics are a lot less exciting, like shitty vision, which isn't much of a superpower, I gotta admit. But in addition to genetics, which is still a very new science for us, there's a brand new science that we're just learning to read, and it's a science called epigenetics. Now, everybody thinks of DNA as those happy little ladders that are twisted around, but really, if you took DNA and you stretched out the DNA in your cell, which is microscopic, it would extend over 1 meter in length. So obviously it can't be hanging around in each one of your cells in that happy little double helix. What it does is it has something called called methylation, or histones. And the histones are balls, and it wraps the DNA around it, twisting it up on itself, and bending it into something called chromatins. Now, chromatins unbind and unkink, allowing the DNA to express itself in different ways. Everybody likes to think of these cells kind of doing things, you know, maybe this cell will make a copy of itself, and then it rests. But that's not how cells act. Your cells, in every single cell in your body, are 50,000 jet engines going at full blast every second. Your cells aren't sitting there passively doing things. They're making things. They're creating things. They're killing themselves. They're watching out for invaders. They're doing so much. Now, the only way these get expressed is the chromatin relaxes and bends, allowing certain genes to be expressed and other ones to be suppressed entirely. And this is where we get to epigenetics, this is not entirely random. The agouti mouse came from mice that were bred to have very special problems. If we want to study diabetes or some strange diseases, we need mice that have those diseases. And the agouti mice have those diseases, so we use them as study tools. But what we found out is if we don't feed them a normal diet, if we feed them a very strict diet, their genetic expression changes, and it does it because of those chromatins, because of those histones. The things we eat can affect us. The things we eat can affect our kids. The things we eat can affect our goddamn grandkids. I have kids, and I've eaten like shit my entire life, and finding this out does not make me happy. So I have to kind of boost up my flagging sense of self-importance by saying, maybe what I'm really doing is giving my daughter her goddamn mutant powers. So, if you eat a diet that is high in sugar and fats, what you're doing is you are adding methylation. You are changing the genetic expression of both some of your genes and your children's genes and your grandchildren's genes. By the same token, if you have folic acid, so any of you have ever had kids, you know you're supposed to plug yourself full of folic acid. What it does is it removes methyl ions, making more genes come expressed. We're in this weird back and forth of massively over-methylating our genes and massively under-methylating our genes. But no matter which way we end up going, what you're doing is changing the expression. Now there's one more thing I'd like to say before I get off of the stage, and that is, it's not just food that does this. If you take a mouse and some mice are just naturally more nurturing than other mice. If you take the children from a nurturing mother and you put it with a non-nurturing mother mouse, what you get are children that are very different from the one that was with the nurturing mother mouse. It's not genetics. The very act of nurturing changes the methylation pattern on your DNA. Now, the next thing is totally out in left field. There's no science to support it. It's just me thinking about things, so don't take this as anything real outside of just my imagination. But I have to wonder, if you were born to a family that suffered really high stress. We're talking Irish potato famine, we're talking slavery, we're talking genocide, we're talking any of the horrible things that mankind inflicts upon itself or the natural world inflicts upon us. That has to have an effect on your methylation. That has to have an effect on the expression of your genes. People who are born to poverty are more likely to continue in poverty, and people who are born in poverty are more likely to witness violence by a massive factor. If you are born to somebody in poverty, if you were born to a poor family and you are more likely to see violence, you are more likely, just like that mayfly, to change the very expression of your genes. And if it takes 3 generations to get rid of this, to change the methylation pattern, are we really the self-made men that everybody expects us to be? Or are we just Wolverine with really shitty powers?